escape the rat race and free yourself from slavery. At least that's the narrative that you see all over the internet, where people love to trash 9 to 5. On the other side, you've got the older generation praising careers, implying that it's the key to a stable life, as they reminisce back to a time where a job could buy you a house and support a stay-at-home spouse, and even have kids. And in my opinion, I feel like both views are completely out of touch with reality. Because sure, the 9 to 5 can bring stability, but in my opinion, it's just not enough for the type of lifestyle that you've dreamed of, since everything is just so damn expensive. And the way I want to structure this video is by warning you about the potential pitfalls, as well as the advice given to you by both people online and in the real world, whilst helping you navigate through these perspectives and hopefully develop a healthier mindset regarding the 9 to 5. Because I want to share my own story on how naive I was on the whole 9 to 5 world before experiencing it firsthand. And I've seen it with my own two eyes on how harsh the corporate world can be. But before I get into anything, you've probably heard the noise online where 9 to 5s will make you a slave to the matrix. But we have to realize that the way it's been presented is quite manipulative. It's essentially a sales tactic to get you feeling some sort of pain for your current lifestyle, so that you're put in a vulnerable position, so that you're able to buy the product or service the other individual is trying to shove down your throat. This is also including the entrepreneurs who are stunting their glamorous lifestyle, which doesn't quite capture their entire success story. Whether it was from genuine hard work, or countless sleepless nights, or even the fact that somebody else gave them this lump sum of money, we would never know, as this usually isn't portrayed on social media. And so it can be easy for an individual who's been grinding in that 9 to 5 and just stop and wonder whether the grass is greener on the other side. Because let's be honest, the traditional working environment of the 9 to 5, it's tough, because many people are quite literally dying for a paycheck, sacrificing their health and well-being in exchange. And of course, there are reasons for this, which is what I'm going to get into now. The first one is the stress from working long hours, which can come about when you're trying to keep up with the increasingly expensive cost of living, along with the constant fear of layoffs, downsizing, as well as automation taking over, which can make a person feel like they have very little control over their career and future. Plus, let's not forget that the 9 to 5 is more like an 8 to 5, or even a 7 to 7 for some people when you factor in the commute times, which can make a person feel like they're living to work. Because how many times have you heard someone in the office say, "I'm so tired, I can't wait to go on the holiday," which is usually around 2 weeks, in exchange for selling your soul and essentially slaving away for a company that you probably don't really care about. And when you try to voice your opinions and frustrations, all the people around you would try to tell you to just accept it because you're in the real world now, whatever that's supposed to mean. And as you can imagine, this can psychologically chip away at a person's sense of self-worth and security. It also probably doesn't help the fact that the line between work and personal life has become a lot more blurred, especially with the rise in remote working and how connected we are digitally. It's the reason why employees always feel like they're on mode, constantly checking those emails and finishing up those tasks after hours. And this poor work-life balance usually leads to strained relationships, little times for pursuing your hobbies, and little time for actually resting and recharging. On top of that, many employees often feel underpaid for the value that they're providing to the company that they're working for. Because in the past, hard work was often correlated with a better financial future. But nowadays, wages have essentially stagnated, and the cost of living continues to rise. And many people feel like no matter how hard they try, it feels like they're just about scraping by. And so this sense of exploitation, if you will, combined with the pressures to always do more, can make the 9 to 5 feel like less like a job and more like a modern form of slavery. And they're not necessarily wrong in thinking this way. And a lot of workers, after, say, they do scroll through motivational success content, they may start to naturally wonder if it's in their best interest to actually follow their passion and ditch their 9 to 5 completely. Because let's take this person called James, for example, who felt repulsed by the idea of the conventional 9 to 5. You know, the whole working for somebody else and trading your time for money. And so he does pull the trigger and makes the big move of dropping out of college and starting that new business venture. And so he decides to embark on this journey to show both me, you, and everybody else that the average Joe can build a successful business and quote-unquote live that dream life. And I'm never going to knock on somebody's ambition. I mean, I'll be the first supporter. But we really have to think on whether James has really thought this through. Because let me tell you the reality of the situation. It might be good for the first week or two because motivation is high, and James truly believes that this business has the potential to go to the moon. Sounds exhilarating. But as weeks turn into months, the passion for the business that James thought he once had slowly starts to fade away, as he doesn't see the immediate results for his hard work. And this unconventional lifestyle that James had been trying to build up for, he realizes that it's quite unsustainable, and he requires more money now to pay the bills, rent and food, and also reinvest into the business, as the amount of money that he had saved up before he quit his 9-to-5 is starting to dry up. And James starts to panic as he realizes that he would actually have to go get a job to pay the bills. And essentially, he's back to square one. The thing is, James hasn't done anything inherently wrong, except the fact that he lacked enough career and financial capital to build enough of a safety net if things were to go south. So you may know what financial capital is, which is essentially the amount of funding that you've got saved up. But you may not have heard of what career capital is. So I came across this term in the book called So Good That They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. And essentially this refers to the valuable skills that you've developed that you can showcase and stand out in the working world. So say James decided to finish his education and go get a job for 5 years and suddenly becomes a senior software engineer who's making $100,000 per year. And now he decides to start the business. Now, this is a completely different scenario and a good one for a couple of different reasons. The first one being that James now has a good enough cash flow to save up an emergency fund and invest into that business idea. The second thing is, during those 5 years, James would have accumulated both hard skills and soft skills, as well as the work ethic to push through when the going gets tough, which would transfer quite well into the business idea that he's trying to go for. And the third thing is, worst case scenario, James's emergency fund dries up completely, and now James has to actually go get a job to pay the bills. Now, the thing is, James is in a very great position here, as James is able to negotiate raises and ask for flexible working conditions, such as remote working, working from home, or even part-time, so that James has enough time to actually focus on his business. This example of James challenges the common negative belief that a lot of people have when it comes to trying to pursue their passion, and the 9-to-5 being the factor which holds them back. But nowadays, I have a completely different view on this whole matter, because a 9-to-5 will give you the money to survive, along with the extra time such as the 5 to 9 as well as weekends to actually work on that passion. But here's the catch, right? You'd actually have to sacrifice those time and money sinks in your life, such as you doom scrolling on social media, or even those monthly subscriptions that you don't really use. Now, that might sound a little bit extreme, but if you don't do this, you may actually run the risk of trapping yourself into that sort of 9-to-5 lifestyle if you don't use that time to work on certain skills, or your money to invest in certain projects or ideas. It's also the reason why I wholeheartedly agree and believe in the Craftsman mindset over the passion mindset, as it was described in Cal Newport's book. And those who fail to take action and develop certain skills are in for a rude awakening. And those two concepts I've mentioned earlier, those two mindsets, I would get into later in the video. And hypothetically, say you had a business idea similar to James, and you ran with it and it actually popped off, and now you've quote unquote made it. The only question I have for you is, what if it's actually not your true passion and you grow to dislike it within the next 5 to 10 years? Because I truly believe that it does take a while to find our passions. And this is something that we can do for the long haul and not for just a couple of months. And I'm going to challenge the conventional message of quote unquote following your passion, as I feel like it does more harm than good, as it kind of encourages individuals to end up job hopping or even jumping in between different business ideas. Even someone like Steve Jobs, who later became an advocate for following your passion, didn't quite follow that exact path before starting Apple. Like many of us, he was a lost young man who dropped out of college and was just trying to find his place in the world. Initially, he was involved in electronics, partly to make some quick cash, working on projects such as blue boxes, which were actually legal devices back then, used to make free long-distance calls. But when Jobs noticed this excitement among the locals when they would meddle with these model kit computers as a hobby, Jobs saw a massive opportunity. And this was when he started off with a small project, which we now know as the Apple computer. And it took off, and it did better than he expected. It's interesting because if Jobs had strictly followed a singular passion, he would have probably been doing a completely different career. But his willingness to have varied interests and explore different avenues is what led to the success of Apple as we know it today. And it just begs the question, do we just find work that we'll eventually love like Steve Jobs did? Or should we refrain from sticking to one rigid career path and instead try these little different schemes and just business ideas, hoping that one will take off? And what about the field we want to explore? And when do we know when it's the right time to move on to a next project or stick out with the one project that we're on right now? So in other words, the story of Steve Jobs generates more questions than answers when it comes to quote unquote following your passion. Because if you decide to roll the dice and it doesn't land, it's tough because the corporate world is unforgiving for one simple reason. It operates on a currency of skills and knowledge. And if you were an individual who, say, didn't really take that early stage of your life seriously, of say getting an education and building up that work experience, then you're left picking up the crumbs on low paying jobs that offer very little security. And sure, there are benefits in working in these kinds of jobs if you're switching between jobs, for instance, short term. But long term, I don't think it's ideal. And it's quite a sad reality as it leads to this sort of vicious cycle, as a lack of education often leads to reduced job opportunities. And in turn, this results in lower income potential, which unfortunately ends up in financial instability. The tragedy here isn't about the money itself, but it's more so about having the freedom to carve out the type of lifestyle that you want to live, whilst being able to, of course, move up the ladder or switch careers. And employees know that you can be replaced in these low-paying jobs if you have no skills, which is what results in these sort of job insecurities. And this is also not to mention that you just about make enough to survive, which is a tough life. And you start building an unhealthy relationship with money as you start to feel the burn of every penny that comes out of your pocket. And maybe you're around my age, you're maybe in your late teens or early 20s, and maybe you're working a part-time or even a full-time job and you're thinking, that's fine for now. I mean, I've got enough to buy what I need and say take a girl out on a date. But as you get older, you're naturally going to want more in life. And there tends to be an increase in financial responsibility, from say having kids to your healthcare and just general expenses. And without the career capital, like I mentioned earlier, you're gonna feel trapped, just being unable to ascend the economic ladder and just having the general inflexibility to move around career-wise. And this is the point where you would start to feel like a slave to the 9 to 5. And this sort of entrapment usually occurs from our disconnect with our work as we enter adulthood, as we're essentially designed and programmed by society to rely on extrinsic motivation. Because, you know, if you study and work hard like a good little boy, then you'll be rewarded with praise, good grades, and a high pay. And I love this analogy, and you may have heard of this before, where a man is riding this donkey with this carrot on a stick, and he's dangling the carrot in front of the donkey at the perfect distance where the donkey cannot actually reach the carrot itself. But psychologically, the donkey feels like it can get to the carrot. And this is completely different to the natural inner desires that we had as children to learn, to discover, and help other people, which is what makes our work fulfilling if you do get to that stage. For instance, staying up late to save a company $500,000 can leave you quite drained, versus you getting one step closer to curing cancer. Bro, you're gonna feel so energized to get to that goal. And this is where the Craftsman mindset that I alluded to earlier come into play, because we intrinsically understand that we need to get good if we want good things in our working life. And this is what the Craftsman mentality is all about, where you're focused on the value that you can provide to the world, whereas the passion mindset is more about what the world can offer you. And if you do adopt this Craftsman mentality, you end up becoming so good at that one thing that it actually just becomes your passion. And there is this thing of the 10,000 hours of putting your time into a particular craft or a project is when you would achieve true mastery. Now, in the context of the 9 to 5, am I telling you to put 10,000 hours into a particular job? Not necessarily, but it's more so about the mentality of sticking through it, even though it may not feel like your passion right now. And we can see examples of this in real life, where passion is built up over time rather than it being predetermined, if that makes any sense. And this can be the difference between whether your 9 to 5 feels like slavery, or it's leading you to the path of success. It's quite literally the way in which you approach it. So just to reiterate, what I would recommend you doing is continue building up your skill set, build up that career capital, and use your time wisely, because the 9 to 5 can give you the stability for survival. And couple that with the right mindset, you've got the perfect concoction to go after those quote-unquote passion goals of yours. And this is where I'm going to leave off the video with you. I appreciate you watching the video, and if you're still interested, you can check out the videos that are popping up on screen right now.